Good morning, good afternoon. In the name of the National Latino Behavioral Health Association and the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center, we welcome you. Our center is happy to partner with the National American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention Technology Transfer Center to bring you a four-part virtual learning session series around culture is prevention. This is the third session titled Spirituality in the Hispanic and Latino Culture and its Role in the Prevention and Healing. My name is Priscila Giamasi. I am the Executive Administrative Assistant for the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and I will be your host for today's session. Before we introduce you to our moderator and panelists, I would like to please turn it over to Dr. Mancini so he can present us with our opening blessing.
Thank you, Priscilla. This activity was introduced to us by our brothers and sisters at the National American Indian and Alaska Native, PTTC. Loving Heavenly Father, we offer ourselves to Thee and come to You this time, asking for Your blessing and help as we're gathered together. We pray for guidance as we discuss this important topic and ask that You would clearly show us how to conduct our work with spirit of joy and enthusiasm. Give us the desire to find ways to excel in our work. Help us to work together and encourage each other to excellence. We ask that we would challenge each other to reach higher and further to the best we can be for the betterment of our communities. In Your name, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Mancini. This was a powerful and such a beautiful way to start our session. We appreciate. Now, please allow us to share some brief instructions about today's VLS. This VLS will be recorded and archived for future playback. A copy of today's presentation will also be available after the event. The lines will be muted through the presentation to minimize background noise. When we get to the Q&A portion of our session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions by clicking the Q&A box, and the moderator will present your questions to our panelists. Now, please allow me to introduce you to the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, NALBA. NALBA is a nonprofit organization located in New Mexico. The mission and goal of NALBA is to influence national behavioral health policy, eliminate disparities in funding and access to services, and improve the quality of services and treatment outcomes for Latino populations. NALBA's executive director is Mr. Fred Sandoval. Now, let me introduce you to our Prevention Technology Transfer Center. Our PTTC is part of the TTC network, a multidisciplinary resource for professionals in prevention field. The PTTC network was established by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. It is comprised of 10 domestic regional centers, 2 national focus areas, and a network coordinating office. Together, the network serves the 50 US states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and the Pacific Islands of Guam, American Samoa, Palau, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and the Mariana Island. Here, you will see a map of the US-based PTTCs. Our center has a national focus for Hispanic and Latino communities and the workforce that provides services to these communities. Our PTTC is staffed by Dr. Pierluigi Mancini, our project director, Douka Michelle Zelaya as project coordinator, and Priscila Giamasi serving as the executive administrative assistant. We will also be asking you to fill out a brief survey at the end of this event. The satisfaction evaluation is very important to the work we do and provide us opportunity to improve our training efforts. Although we are not providing continuing education credits for this event, we plan to do so for future events. A certificate of completion will be sent to you after this session. Now it's time to introduce you to our moderator. Dr. Pierluigi Mancini is the project director for the National Hispanic and Latino Addiction Technology Transfer Center and the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center. Both centers are housed at the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, NALBA. With over 30 years of experience in culturally and linguistically appropriate behavioral health treatment and prevention, Dr. Mancini is one of the most requested after national and international consultants and speakers on the subject of mental health and addiction. His area of expertise is immigrant behavioral health. Dr. Mancini, welcome. Thank you for helping us to moderate the session. We appreciate you. Please proceed to introduce our panelists and start the conversation.
Thank you again, Priscilla, and hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for spending the afternoon with us. I'm really pleased that you're here today. I think you're in for a real treat, not only because of our topic, but because of the guests that we have today. Dr. Eliseo Cheo Torres has served as Vice President for Student Affairs and as a full professor at the University of New Mexico since January 2nd, 1996. He is responsible for all facets of student life, which include programs such as El Centro de la Raza, African American and American Indian Student Services, Women's Resource Center, a Student Union, a Student Activities, a Student Health and Counseling Center, Career Services, and others. He teaches 3 classes on traditional medicine and regularly lectures and gives presentations on the history and lore of curanderismo to audiences ranging from scholars and students of Latin American culture to people hoping to become knowledgeable about alternative and traditional medicine, including lay people and medical professionals. He has published 4 books on his life and his research in traditional medicine, emphasizing medicinal plant and rituals, published by the University of New Mexico Press and Kendall Hunt Publishing Company. Welcome, Dr. Torres. And Dr. Stephen M. Quintana. Dr. Quintana is chair and professor of the Department of Counseling Psychology at the University of Wisconsin. He has received the Chancellor's Award for Teaching Excellence for Inclusive Excellence and School of Education Excellence in Diversity. He has proposed and evaluated a model of ethnic perspective-taking development. He has been associate editor of the Journal of Counseling Psychology, Child Development, and lead editor of Race, Ethnicity, and Culture in Child Development. He was awarded the Ford Foundation Postdoctoral Fellowship and Gimbel Child and Family Scholar Awards. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Carrollton College in Minnesota and a master's and doctorate degrees from the University of Notre Dame. He is lead partner on a $1 million community university partnership grant to address mental health disparities in Latinx communities. Dr. Torres and Dr. Quintana, welcome and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and get started by discussing spirituality. So spirituality is a very powerful word. In Hispanic Latino communities, it seems to have different meaning for some, different understanding, and different depth. Dr. Torres, how would you define spirituality in Hispanic Latino communities?
Thank you, Dr. Mancini. I think you mentioned that it's difficult to define, and that is correct. Spirituality to you may be different to me, but we do know that it is the inner life or the soul. And it comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means soul or breath. And I agree with Dr. Maya Spencer's definition of spirituality. And it is a belief that there is something greater than ourselves, and our lives go beyond everyday existence. Now, as a Latino, I grew up in a community of Latinos where spiritualism was interwoven into religion. Everything seemed to be centered around the church, the Catholic Church. Baptisms, confirmations, birthdays, weddings, communions, and also funerals. And even our social life was centered around the church, including sports, baseball, basketball, also dances, bingos in the parish hall, and the priest joined us for special dinners. We raised goats, and my mother would cook the famous cabrito, and the priest always came for cabrito dinner. I was an altar boy, went to a Catholic school, and practiced spiritualism daily. However, now I'm not close to the church, but I have learned to practice spiritualism from my curandero mentors, teachers like Chanchito, Rita, and Laurencio. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. Dr. Quintana, would you have anything to add to that definition?
No, just to emphasize many of the things, but also the spirituality is really not just spiritual beliefs or something that's done on celebrations or on holidays, but really is a way of looking at the world. It's a kind of a relationship with the broader world, with the social world, with the supernatural world, with each other. So it's really a part of the fabric of the culture, a critical part of the culture that's practiced influences everyday life in many different ways.
Thank you. And Dr. Quintana, then can you tell us a little bit about the science that underlies the importance of spirituality and how that importance relates to substance use prevention and substance use disorder treatment?
Yeah, I can address that in a more general manner in terms of adjustment. And you may know or be familiar with the immigrant paradox, where those immigrants that are newly arrived have the best health and are the most motivated in terms of education. And somewhat sadly, the longer that they're part of the US and sort of get some of the North American culture, their health declines and their motivations in school sometimes decline. So this immigrant paradox is, despite all of the acculturation challenges that new immigrants coming in, it's really their culture, and a large part of that is their spirituality that really allows them to maintain a positive mental health. So the depression is lower for early arrivals from Latin America. Drug addiction and alcohol addictions are much more in those new arrivals. And then as they spend time here, they they lose a little bit of in touch with their culture. And the consequence of that is that they then pick up some of the bad habits of North America. So the more that they can maintain and be centered within their culture, and their spirituality is a critical part of that, the more adaptive they are, the more willing they're able to take on some challenges. So the research supports that in many different contexts in terms of spiritual well-being, adjustment in different contexts, to school, to college, to life. It's associated with health behaviors in terms of social, providing some social support. There's a positive effect on mental health, and the mental health benefits also help them survive illnesses and other challenges. And also their resilience to challenge, being able to find meaning in adversity is an important part of that. And interesting research is on the connection between spirituality and thriving, where those that are very spiritual have this sort of thriving characteristic that they allow them to grow in response to change and adversity. And it allows them, spiritual beliefs allow them to make meaning out of the challenges and suffering that they may be experiencing, the apparent unfairness of it. And then allows through the spirituality sort of redemptive narratives that allow them to sort of create a sense of identity around who they are spiritually, culturally. And then across the board, the spirituality is particularly strong among older Latinos, the older Hispanics, and that the older Hispanics tend to be have higher well-being than for their non-Hispanic peers, and that's because of the spirituality connections, or the deeper sense of spirituality among the Hispanics. And it's included in the day laborers that are experiencing discrimination on a daily basis. And that the spirituality is one of the strongest predictors of well-being and being able to manage some some challenges.
Excellent. And so, you know, it's a really important part of our community. And I know that in my family, whether things were good or bad, you would have prayers, you would have candles, you would, you know, run to church or speak to whatever your spiritual advisor was at the time. So Dr. Torres, how have these spiritual beliefs either helped or hinder the ability for Hispanic and Latinos to take advantage of those protective factors that do exist within our communities for us to participate in traditional prevention programs and services?
Well, followed up on what Dr. Quintana mentioned, I agree with him because we work with many healers, mostly from Mexico, but from other countries. And every summer, except this summer, we have a traditional health fair where we have all sorts of treatments, traditional treatments. And the largest group that shows up are recent immigrants and the older Hispanic population that are very strong in their spiritual beliefs. So, but I have noticed that people are taking care of their mind, body, spirit, and their self-esteem seems to be very high. So that goes along with what Dr. Quintana just mentioned. As far as protective factors in traditional and prevention medicine, we seem to be returning back to our traditional healing roots, which is wonderful. And that's why I get involved in teaching this topic, not only at the university, but also in the community. I teach 3 courses during the year and a face-to-face class in the summer, except this summer, the course is online. And I do have mentors. I have mentors like Chenchito. Chenchito is from Mexico. All 3 mentors are from Mexico. He just passed away 2 years ago at the age of 90. I have Rita Navarrete from Mexico City, Laurencio Nunez from Oaxaca. And these mentors have really helped me with my spiritual journey. And they're some of the most spiritual individuals that I have met. I've also discovered that the Latino spiritual culture and spiritual protection is very similar to 2 other cultures that I recently experienced. I was in Israel not too long ago, and for a couple of weeks, the last day I was there, I had dinner at a friend's house, and I saw on the wall that she had a hand, a pewter, like aluminum hand. And I asked her, and I have a photo of that hand, a picture of that hand. I asked her, that reminds me of my mother's powerful hand, la mano poderosa. She said, well, this hand represents the 5 books of the Torah, and also represents the hand of Miriam, who was Moses and Aaron's sister, and it is for spiritual protection. I said, well, that's nice. So she gave it to me. A year later, I went to Egypt, and I was in Cairo, and I saw this hand. And I said, is that, in Israel, they call it the Kamsa. And I told the shop owner, I said, is that the Kamsa? He said, no, this is a Hamsa. And it represents the 5 virtues of the Islamic religion. And that is faith, fasting, prayer, giving, and pilgrimage. And I thought for a minute, I said, well, in my religion, I have those pillars of those 5 pillars. I said, I have faith, I fast during Lent, I pray, I give, I do a pilgrimage. When I was in Texas, I went to the Basilica de San Juan del Valle in San Juan, Texas. Now I go to the Santuario de Chimayo for Good Friday, and I do a pilgrimage. But going back to the 5 pillars, I came home, I asked my brother, where's my mother's mano poderosa? So he gave me the mano poderosa. My mother had already passed away. She had it on her altar, and there was a paper next to it, and it said that this was the hand of God. It represented baby Jesus, Mother Mary, grandmother Anne, grandfather Ibrahim, and of course, Father Joseph. And it said it is for spiritual protection. And so here we have three different cultures, 3 different religions, and 1 belief system, and that is for spiritual protection for all of them. So it is, the more that I study this topic, the more that I realize the similarities we have throughout the world. I thought maybe I would mention that experience because it is amazing how much similar we are in cultures. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Dr. Quintana, do you see any advantages or disadvantages of spirituality in Latinx communities and some of these protective factors like familismo, respeto, and so on?
Yeah, I think with those cultural values, they do help. But with spirituality, it really addresses loneliness. So the experience of loneliness is one of the greatest health factors we have, and it's has more deleterious effect on health, more so than even smoking. So really, ways to address loneliness has a huge impact on it. And I think with the spirituality, with the various practices, sort of artifacts, memories, and sort of to the religion, allows Latinos to have this presence there, sort of omnipresence there, that allows them to sort of deal with some of the challenges, the isolation, and the loneliness that they have there. So it's really a wonderful, enriching part of their life too. And as I know, probably many know, the Latino spirituality bridges so many different forms and faiths. So from the Spain, there's the Moors, the Jews, and the Christians coming in, and then integrating some of the indigenous health beliefs that are part of it, and also Santeria in the Caribbean. So there's really this wonderful syncretic sort of integration across many of these religious beliefs that really add to the diversity of spirituality within Latin America.
Well, let me keep rolling with that, because I think one of the items that interested me about your background is you helping us be able to clarify how science has played a role demystifying and breaking some of these barriers, either through development of tools or other practices and service. Can you talk a little bit about how science has played a role in this?
Yeah, so what I really enjoy finding out is with the science sort of validates many of the cultural beliefs that we have, and maybe makes it more convincing to broader audiences for that. But a lot of the intuitive senses we have about how humans function that are captured within the culture are being validated by much of the science. And I think whenever you're working with people, with humans, it differentiates from the medical model, where the medical model is really looking at biological factors, diseases, viruses, bacteria, sort of some breakdown of biological factors. And when they get to the root of the thing, it's really sort of physical. But, and so within behavioral health, we try to borrow that sort of medical model. And what we're finding is that it just doesn't fit, that that there are these sort of psychological phenomena that really operate at a much different level. So there may be some biological components to it, but really being able to intervene in a more spiritual connection is really able to get at the direct effects of some of these things. One example is that, with psychotherapy, we try to find what ingredients are really helpful for making this more effective. And so can we tie in a part of the therapy to some outcome? And what we find is that there really isn't this sort of additive model, that it's pretty much a whole gestalt that sort of enters into this sort of healing relationship. And the healing relationship can be sort of informed by Western medicine, or it could also be informed by cultural factors, or also by spiritual beliefs that are part of it. And that there are very parallel outcomes from that too. So there is not a one-to-one sort of connection between some of these more medical interventions and these outcomes, but that there's really, what we find is this installation of hope, this being able to grow and change in the context of a social relationship. There's this sense of being able to be understood by a healer, by someone coming into your life. And then also a sense of credibility that what we're doing is going to make sense to me, that the reason why I got the way I was is going to be addressed in this treatment, and how I get out of it is going to be addressed to it. So if we have a medical background and we sort of expect a pill, we're going to look for a pill. But many of the Latinos have sort of a spiritual ideology, if you will, to some of the challenges that they are facing. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to give them a pill to be able to address these things that have more of a spiritual origin to them. and that they're going to maybe go along with the course of treatment or the prevention strategies. But in the end, we find that it's most effective to be able to match what is the explanation or the understanding that the client has with the treatment that makes sense, more so than there's some unique component for each therapeutic agent or part of therapy too. So it's really the magic of human relationships, growing in relationships, connecting with others in a very deep manner, and to be able to connect in a very empathic manner too.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. Has any of your research tied in science with any of the spiritual beliefs and spiritual practices?
Well, there seems to be more interest on traditional medicine. In fact, I lecture quite often to the medical school, and just last week, I spoke to the class on cadavers, on anatomy, and we had a very good discussion. Also in the nursing college, in occupational therapy, we take groups of medical students to Mexico and work with healers. I think that the medical profession is paying more attention to traditions, to what their patients bring to them when they come, especially the immigrant population that still has strong beliefs in traditional medicine. There's not enough research. I'm hoping that we can encourage, and there seems to be more students interested in doing research, and especially doing their dissertations on this topic. I've had 2 or 3 dissertations on this topic. So I see that there will be more interest in it because it makes a lot of sense scientific, some of the things that our ancestors have been doing for years. Even a lot of the plants, the chemicals that they have been very effective. So there is a lot of interest. I see that not only in New Mexico, but all over the Southwest and all over the country. So I think we're going to see more and more research in this topic.
Thank you. So in the, let's move a little bit about a topic that comes up often, and I don't know how well understood it is, and that is the topic of spiritual cleansing. So Dr. Torres, can you share with us some of the elements and techniques about spiritual cleansing?
A lot of Latinos from all over the world have experienced some type of spiritual cleansings. They may call it a limpia espiritual, a limpia energética, and it also has the same meaning. I've worked with curanderos from Cuba, from Puerto Rico, from Africa, from some of the Afro-Caribbean islands, and they all have a limpia, and they call it different names. I'm familiar with the Mexican limpia more than others. And it's to remove negative energy and supports prevention of future unwanted energy. And the elements that some curanderos use are 5 elements or a combination of these 5. Sometimes it's 1, 2, or 3 of these elements. And it's plants, it's an egg, it's water, it's incense, and it could be a candle. Again, you can use 1, 2, or 3 of these elements or all of these elements. My friend, a curandero and mentor, Laurencio, uses all 4 of them. He's from Oaxaca. First, the plants. The plants provide, and it's just not any plants. It could be lavender or alucema, lavanda. It could be ruda, rue. It could be rosemary or romero or other aromatic plants. And plants provide positive energy, and they sweep away negative vibrations from the body. And this is done from head to toe, sweeping the body in prayer, in a chant, or in a song. It varies according to who's doing the limpia. The egg, why an egg? An egg is the largest living cell that absorbs negative vibrations. While the plant sweeps them, the egg absorbs them, and it cleanses the body, mind, spirit, and even one's heart. Water. Water is considered a spiritual drink and the breath of life. It's sprayed sometimes on the different joints of the body. Incense. The incense that they use mostly is copal. Copal comes from the copal tree. It's a wonderful fragrance. It's used in churches many times. And they use an incense burner called saumerio or popochcomi to burn the incense and smudge your body with the smoke. The smoke cleanses your body of unwanted energy and spirit. And finally, a candle. A candle is given to the person who's having the limpia to burn at home to destroy fears, anguish, anxiety, and sickness. Many of these elements, think about it, especially the plants or flowers, water, holy water, incense, and candles are used in church ceremonies. So these elements are used in the limpia. What other rituals do they use in spiritual cleansings? Well, in the case of susto, what is susto? Susto is considered by sociologists as magical fright when you've had a traumatic experience. Sometimes even PTSD is referred to as susto, post-traumatic stress disorder. People have anxiety, they have flashbacks, they have nightmares, they have insomnia, they can't eat, they don't eat much, or they overeat. This trauma, if this trauma is ignored, it could because it could cause susto pasado, a very serious illness. And a limpia is performed using aromatic plants, just like the limpia that I just mentioned. You could also include flowers like roses. It's considered a soul retrieval concept, that you've lost your soul and you're bringing your soul or your spirit back into your body. Again, it's just a wonderful ritual that's very, very effective. And I've seen it with people that are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, especially soldiers that come back from wars. The other thing that's making a comeback, not only in New Mexico, but in Mexico and other parts of the country, or the sweat lodges called temazcals. For the past 20 years, I've experienced native sweat lodges, Lakota sweat lodges, Apache sweat lodges, and now Mexican sweat lodges. And we have several new sweat lodges in New Mexico. But what a wonderful concept of going in, having a steam bath, sweating out your toxins, and also having a ceremony inside the sweat lodge that supports your psychological problems if that's what you're having. We find that very effective in northern New Mexico, and Fred Sandoval can tell you because he knows about the 2 sweat lodges that were constructed in oil recovery program for alcoholism, behavioral problems, substance abuse, and they have been very, very effective. Just recently, a friend of mine built 2 of them here in the South Valley of Albuquerque, Albino Garcia. He also has an institute, and he works with incarcerated youth that have just left jail or prison or in jail right now, and they're let go for a day or so to experience a sweat lodge. He has a native sweat lodge and he has a Mexican sweat lodge, and he says it's a condor and the eagle that meet in between both of these sweat lodges. But we find those very, very effective. I thought those are some things that are happening right now that I find that are effective and working very well in the Latino communities.
Thank you so much. I had the opportunity in December to participate in a Mexican sweat lodge, and it was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever felt in my life. So I can attest to that. Is there the role of incense in these ceremonies? Is that separate? Is that sometimes used at the same time? Is there a different meaning to incense in some of these rituals?
The incense is used in most ceremonies. It's used before you go into the sweat lodge. It's used for limpias. It's used for opening blessings, for closing blessings. It's always been used in Mexico. Now, I think that Latinos here in the U.S. are discovering copal. And copal seems to be the more effective. There's about 5 different types of copal. The white copal is my favorite. So yes, incense is very important. And remember, in churches, incense has always been part of the ceremonies.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Quintana. Before I go to my next question to you, do you have anything to add about the lodges or the incense or any of the other rituals?
No, but what I can sort of provide is sort of a psychological connections to that. And so really, I think a lot of these deep spiritual practices helps to center the folks to really bring back their spirituality, their belief in a higher power in God, to bring to bear on some of the challenges, whether it be PTSD and so forth. So I think it's really calling upon that part of them. And so a lot of them reflect upon growing up in these traditions. And so it really helps them connect who they were at a younger time, who they are culturally with their family, and also with the beliefs and the faith that they've had for their entire lives. So it really is an integrated process.
Thank you. Let me extend that into my next question. And then some of the questions are building up in the Q&A, so we'll start addressing some of those. But Dr. Quintana, can you talk a little bit about emphasizing the importance of respecting the different spheres of influence, clergy, family members, and if you can include a little bit, I know you've done some work with children and young people, as to how that would play a role in what we're discussing here today.
Yeah, so I think as behavioral therapists, workers, and so forth, we think that our advice is the only one that the clients are getting to. But what we've interviewed with many of the patients is that they're getting advice from different sources. So the clergy may be telling them to pray harder, or don't engage in any of these sort of unapproved practices. There may be some sense that you just need to improve your faith in order to get rid of depression, is another theme for that. Just pray harder and the depression will go away, or the challenges will go away. There'll be people within the family telling them another thing is just, you just gotta, tough up your lip. You gotta just sort of persevere. Don't pity yourself, and just think about the things that you have going for you. And then as behavioral therapists, we come in, and at times they're in conflict with each other, and sort of sadly, the surveys of who's most religious, or who practices religion the most across university campuses, and it's psychologists that are the least religious, and that you'll have biologists and chemists who have a stronger faith and who practice it within churches. So there's really this tension between sort of psychological models of health and how we should be in well-being, and spiritual models. And that gets played out in the therapy rooms and so forth. So there's been clients who mentioned that once they disclose that they're a Christian, for example, to their therapist, the whole feeling in the room changes. And so then that really communicates to them that this part of their life is not really accepted as a part of them. And it really leaves these people alone to sort of navigate these different messages. And when they're contradictory, and when they're sort of hostile to one another, it really does, it really is confusing, and really blunts many of the messages. And so what we found is that if we're able to sit down and say, so what is your family telling you about this? What are your parents? What do you know about this before? What about when you practice your religion? What are some of the messages you're getting out there? And then what are you hearing from me, or from maybe the behavioral health approaches? So how can we integrate some of those things that really make sense for you, and to really work through some of those, and where do you sit in this whole process too? So I think just to leave the clients or the people that you're working with to their own devices, and ignoring these other sources, just adds to the sort of cacophony of imperatives that they're receiving, and that helping acknowledge that there are these multiple sources, and that there's probably some legitimacy to each of those perspectives, and what really makes sense for this person, and how can they integrate it, allows for more of a collaborative connection, as opposed to sort of adversarial with all the different messages that they get.
And is there a difference for children or young people, do you think?
It depends on how much, their perspective taking, and how much they're able to sort of understand that some people have different motivations for them. And so when at a very literal stage, they'll take things as fact. And so then it really becomes confusing for them when they get different messages. So it's really helpful to have some other parents involved in the process. So one of my students did research on the mental health and psychiatric populations in Mexico, and every one of them brought in a family member as part of their healing and treatment. So the sessions were held sort of jointly with them, and that there was this bringing in the family members to really help with this whole process, to bring this process home and be able to continue that process there. So with children, it's really important to involve family members, as hopefully the family members are supportive parts of it, or that there are some confidants that the children can use to be able to help them filter through some of the more confusing messages that they get too.
Thank you so much. Dr. Torres, anything to add on that area?
No, that's well explained. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let's start taking some questions from the Q&A, and I encourage everyone to continue to post questions. So let me start with, how can we incorporate spirituality when supporting a family to affirm their LGBTQ plus children and family members? Who would like to go first?
Could you repeat the question again, especially the first part? So,
Yes. How can we incorporate spirituality when supporting a family to affirm their LGBTQ plus children and family members?
okay. Probably getting at the challenges that sometimes, particularly with more fundamental religious beliefs, that seeing LGBT lifestyles, experiences, relationship as a sin. And what's really helpful across religions is that to understand that there's a faith base to it, and then there's the translation of that into practices, and that there's this cultural loading that goes into these faith-based ones. And what we find is many times it's the cultural loading that then is sort of hostile toward LGBT populations. And then if there's a way to really sort of get at the heart of spirituality, which is to really honor life, honor different life paths, then I think that there could be a little bit more optimism related to sort of integrating spirituality with some of these things that are apparently in contrast with the sort of religious beliefs.
I find that in traditional medicine that LGBTQ is very well accepted, and it's part of the ceremonies, and it's part of some of the healing that takes place. And once the families can see that, I think they can be more supportive.
Thank you. Another question, to what extent does FIRE, or more specifically, gathering around grandfather FIRE with elders who dialogue with the community, occur in contemporary efforts to promote belonging, healing, and thriving? Seems to be more for Dr. Torres.
Yes, fire, of course, is very much part of traditional healing. Fire is part of the Temazcal. Fire, wind, air, that goes along with a lot of the traditional healings. Many times people write down some of their problems on a piece of paper. We have a fire where they burn whatever problems they're experiencing. We find that exercise very, very beneficial. But fire is so important in traditional medicine because it is part of grandfather fire, part of the hot rocks that make up the Temazcal, and the ceremony. Fire is used in the saumerio to burn the incense. So it is very important part of traditional healing.
Thank you. Another question, how can we incorporate mindfulness into a spirituality and Christian faith?
I believe it is part of it. It's already incorporated in it very, very closely. It's pretty much a set thing. Mindfulness and spirituality go hand in hand.
Yeah, at the University of Wisconsin, we have a researcher who studies mindfulness and sort of the neurological foundations of it. And we have the Dalai Lama who comes, and we're able to really study what's going on in his brain. And this meditation has really changed how his brain functions, the pathways, the electrical impulses. It's really had a profound impact on him. So I think there's a connection between the spiritual practices and the biological, neurological foundation and formation.
And you mentioned meditation. Meditation is so important in traditional medicine. Everyone I work with meditates, and that is part of healing. Yeah.
Thank you. There is a personal question that's asking if either of you have any indigenous ties in your ethnic background. If you do you utilize any of that knowledge in your current studies or profession?
I have some indigenous ties, and we work with the indigenous communities here in New Mexico very closely. When the healers from Mexico and other countries come, we're invited into some of the pueblos, indigenous pueblos. It's amazing the similarities in treatments. So, you know, and also the indigenous populations from here do travel to Mexico and meet with their counterparts in Mexico with some of the indigenous groups there, including the Mayan, some of the Aztec groups that practice in Mexico. There's a spiritual connection. Before we had borders, it was just an open area. I mean, there was a communication back and forth.
Yeah, my intentions go too far. Lost the ties before I was born.
How can curanderismo help with substance abuse?
I mentioned earlier that we have done some work with the oil recovery program in northern New Mexico, and it has been very, very effective, especially using the temazcal. The healers built, the temazcaleros who specialize in temazcals and sweat lodges, built 2 temazcal, one for women and one for men in this recovery center. And it was very, very effective. It's still there. I haven't kept up with it, but I heard so many wonderful stories of some healings that happen inside those temazcals. And also they do deal with substance abuse in Mexico with very little budget, if no budget at all, using plants and using ceremonies. And I'm just amazed how effective it is. In this country, we need budgets and we need monies, but in other countries, I've realized that you don't need a lot of money because you're working with nature, and you're working with rituals, and you work with people that want to get well. So I hope that we can come up with a model in the future that would be affordable to be able to work with substance abuse and behavioral problems.
Thank you. So there's an interesting question here that I think we touched on a little bit when we're talking about development of tools. So what are some specific questions a clinician can ask during assessment to learn about a client's spirituality other than what religion are you?
The DSM-5 actually has a cultural formulations interview that allows for some pretty open-ended questions that would have been very effective and helpful in guiding clinicians to sort of find out kind of the explanatory models that the clients are using, explain how they got to be where they are. So it's really very open-ended. Can you tell me more about how you understand whatever they call it? What did you know about it before experiencing this? Had you had anything like this before? Do you know anyone else that has had? Sort of trying to get in the social network and their earlier understanding that they brought to some of those understandings. There's one of my students did research in southern New Mexico, and there was children with cleft palate, and there were explanations that range from my child had a cleft palate because there was a lips during the pregnancy. Another one felt it was because that they had sinned in some important way. And others had more of a biomedical sort of explanation for that too. So some of the interesting origins for how they understand why they're in this situation, and to be really open-ended about it and not to sort of impose a framework, especially the biomedical sort of framework onto that. And then to ask questions about what do you think you need in order to, regain your previous level of functioning, happiness, well-being, and to be really attentive to the answers that they get. So I've had therapists do this with this interviews with clients that they've had for 6 months, 9 months, and they're really surprised by the answers that they get too. So that there's this whole world of explanation and understanding that's going on within the client that is really a critical part of many of the treatments and programming.
Thank you. So there was a question here about the youth shelter I oversee will have many legal guardians who do not understand the need for adolescents to explore spirituality. How would you encourage Latino or Hispanic families to understand this natural need to explore and understand spirituality in adolescence?
I mentioned earlier that my colleague and friend Albino Garcia has an institute called La Placita Institute in the South Valley of Albuquerque. He works with youth. He works with the families. He invites the families to come into the institute, and he brings in healers and other community members. I've been there a number of times. It seems that parents seem to be very open once they understand what the intention of it is. And these are youth that have been incarcerated or going through the judicial system right now. But I find that it's incredible how once they get involved and the parents get involved, there's wonderful, very positive results with both youth and parents. And it's just a matter of communicating. Of course, parents want the best for their family, and they'll get it. And they have at this institute that I just mentioned.
I would agree, just involving the family as much as they can, helping to explain the process, sort of provide a rationale for what's going to happen and what it might look like and some of the benefits, and then to listen to some of the fears or concerns that they might have to be able to address them too.
So in a similar thread, but I think it's a little different. Someone's asking, I've noticed conflict sometimes comes up with acculturation and spiritual religious practices between first-generation children and their parents who immigrated. How can this be handled best? Or have you noticed any of that in some of the work you've done?
I've noticed a little bit of that, but once the students, the courses that I teach bring back a lot of memories. The students had a ritual that was done by grandmother or by one of the aunts, either in Mexico or here. And once they understand what it is, they embrace it. I think that a lot of these youth want to reclaim the culture, but once they know about it, they feel much better, they understand it. We have taught several classes in Mexico, and it's amazing how when the kids get back, they're so proud of who they are. I think it's just a matter of understanding and knowing more about it. And now these classes that I offer are free. They're through Coursera, and families now are seeing this and beginning to be more proud of who they are. And I mentioned the word reclaiming because a lot of our Latino kids here seem to be very proud and want to reclaim their culture.
One thing that the research shows on children of immigrants' parents is that the immigrant parents obviously were raised and sort of had their model for child rearing and relationship between parents and children in a different culture in a different country. They come over to the U.S. many times, and they fear they're losing that imagined relationship that they would have with their children as the children move into adolescence, adulthood. And what we find is that if there are some features of the parents' culture or spirituality that the children will carry with them, that the parents are more accepting of some of the differences or different pathways that they take. So if we're able to focus and say that this is something that the child really wants to continue on with the family tradition, cultural traditions, then the parents are much more willing to sort of accept some of the differences and different pathways that they have, knowing that they have something that they will be able to continue and is being passed on and appreciated by the children.
Excellent. Um, so there's a question about, there are several questions about some of the resources that have been mentioned in, and at the end of the presentation, we were going to provide email addresses for Dr. Torres and Dr. Quintana in case we missed something. But there was one question here that caught my attention. Says, it asks, how would you determine the successfulness of a limpia?
I think the patient or the client will be the one that will tell you, but in just about all cases, they do feel different. They feel better. They sleep better. The whole body changes. And soon after the limpia, they will tell you how they feel. And I don't know any case where people have said, this is a waste of time. And, it's just amazing that you can't explain the feeling. I feel renewed every time I have a limpia. It's like being in church and going to communion. You feel much better. You release certain things. The limpia is just incredible. And I think that, and you don't even have to go to anybody for a limpia. You can learn the limpia. You can do it on yourself. And we have 2 or 3 modules on the resource list through videos, or you can see Laurencio do a comprehensive limpia, or Rita, or Velia, or Juan Carlos. We have several types of limpias. There's no right way to do or wrong way to do a limpia, whatever motivates you. And you can do your own limpia on yourself and your family. I do it on my family. And it's just a wonderful exercise, and it just cleanses your body, and you feel much, much better.
Excellent. So another interesting question. We have a fantastic audience. Some of these questions are very interesting. So Leanne Nettles asks, what would you say about the spirituality of the therapist? How does that impact the treatment? And also in therapy, how would one incorporate prayer during sessions? So kind of a two-parter. First, what would you say about the spirituality of the therapist, and how does that impact the treatment? And then any comments about incorporating prayer during sessions?
Well, a lot of the guidelines are really that the therapist needs to work sort of on their own spiritual well-being. And in training programs, we provide for emotional health, sort of emotional well-being, sort of get to know your relationship well-being, and also our mental health. But we really neglect the spiritual component of that. And if we're really going to engage in a very deep, meaningful way with clients, it really needs to come from a place of growth and strength and of challenge and sort of identification with that process. So there doesn't need to be a match between the spiritual beliefs of the the client or the provider, but that there has to be this deep respect for the faith that the client will bring to it. And I guess an important point I want to make is that a lot of times when spirituality is talked about, it's talked about as if prayer is the same as meditation. But what's missing there is that there's this belief in God, that there's this supernatural forces going on. So, there's a temptation to sort of write these things off as just simply ceremonies that are intrinsically calming and resourceful, but that there's this really fundamental part of a faith that really needs to be respected. So the provider really needs to be careful not to be dismissive of this sort of belief in a higher power, belief in a God that really is the grounding for many people's, particularly religious beliefs in that process. So they would have to kind of come to some awareness of how they are spiritually related to their own beliefs, and be able to then bridge their beliefs with others too.
What the curandero plays the role of a therapist, or a folk therapist, if you will. They will adapt to whatever the client needs. If it's prayer, they will pray. Whatever it is that will, and sometimes the curandero may say, look, it's not me, I am an instrument of God, if the person is religious, and let's pray, if that's what the person wants. If they don't want, then they say, well, let's work on your energy. They don't even call it the spirit. It just depends on the person, and whatever that person needs, the curandero adapts to that need. They may do a plática, which is a heart-to-heart talk, to find out what the problem is, and maybe spend an hour or spend the night at the curandero's home if need be.
Thank you. Any creative practices that you've utilized over the years to help those with a tendency toward framing the dominant culture in North America as the default culture, as opposed to a singular framework among many? In other words, how to invite clinical folks without background or experience or knowledge into conversations around the wisdom and healing that traditional approaches can have for those struggling.
You know, I'm invited to the Health Science Center classes, whether it's medical students, whether it's nursing students, whether it's a faculty. And I think that a lot of the professionals seem to be here in New Mexico, I don't know about other places, very open to learning more about traditional medicine. Sometimes they even want to do some of the rituals and adapt some of those rituals. So I find that there seems to be more acceptance to people's cultures and traditional ways of healing. And that's wonderful. I like to see that. Our medical school works with the Native American culture very closely, and also with the Latino culture, and as long as you don't hurt the person, they say fine, let's work with you, and they have been very open. I'm just finding a lot of positive things with the main culture that seems to be more accepting than any other time.
And I think some of the questions can be asked related to, you know, how is this managed in your family traditions? Where how have you thought about handling these? And then also to be real explicit with some of the, if it's behavioral health strategies, is to sort of culturally label those as this is one approach and it's culturally loaded. So how can, you know, in the heart of this process is really to do X, Y, or Z. How is the best way that we can sort of translate that, adapt that in a way to be able to be consistent with the culture that they have? So really engage the client in that process, be able to be open and learning from the client. And there's such diversity within the Latino population that it would be very hard to be expert in across all those. So we're always very much learning from the clients, especially how it's been adapted within their family, within their community, and so forth from it too. So I think being very open, explicit about that there is not one right way of doing this, and to then engage for the provider, engage the client in this process of how can we make this really compatible or congruent for the way you see it being helpful or most productive for you.
Thank you. Another question is, has the effect of spiritual practices on the endocrine system been measured? Would you, either one of you, know that?
There's been, I'm not sure about the endocrine system, but the more we engage in any cultural behavior, the more those pathways in our brain get well laid out, and the easier it comes. And so then this whole process of having some patterns become more automatic is really the changes in our brain that go on. So I think repeated activities and practices of these are have some neurological impact. They have found that spirituality is connected to blood pressure. It's less connected to sort of cholesterol, that there are these interesting sort of biomedical sort of consequences or outcomes of it. And a lot of it depends on just the different spiritual practices that are engaged in and how intensely, how frequently that they're engaged in. So I'm sorry, I don't know anything specifically about the endocrine system itself.
Excellent. A couple of quick questions about sweat lodges. Few people wanted to know if they're open during the COVID-19 pandemic. Would you know? Dr.
Yes,
Torres?
they're not open, they're closed.
Okay.
Yes.
What impact does the environment where sessions are held have on those seeking therapy support? Many times facilities are painted in dark colors, no visuals, and seems like a cold space. Would you encourage changing the environment where community seeks services?
Personally, yes, I would. You know, the environment that healers work with is in somebody's home or nature. And I hope that that is taken into consideration and have an environment that's not so sterile, that is comfortable to the client or to the patient.
And I think a lot of the cultural artifacts that are available and to be seen offer some primes for each of the clients coming in. And so really what message is being communicated by how the room is set up and decorated and sort of added to. So it really communicates a lot in a more automatic or implicit way to the client that they may not even be able to articulate themselves. Just the feel of the room, I think, is really critical.
So someone wants to know, how would you promote a spirituality and religion to be used as a protective factor? So we've talked about how important it is, how studies have supported it. What strategies or what have you used or what have you seen being used to promote a spirituality and religion as a protective factor?
You know, in curanderismo, it's practice. I mean, there's opening ceremonies constantly. There's prayers. And so I think that people learn from seeing, and also in my summer class, I have like 200 students, and we start the class with an opening ceremony. And at the end of the class, we have a closing ceremony, just like we did for this session. And students are observing this, and I see that, you know, they practice what they learn, what they see. And I think that there's something that when people see you practicing spirituality, then they learn that. And I hope it's lasting and it changes people's lives by observing these things.
I've taught some classes where we've invited students to bring in their cultural or spiritual artifacts and then give a presentation about it. And it's really, and so these are students, Latino students in a predominantly white institution, you know, pretty much have to feel like they have to act white for much of the day. So it's really a sanctuary for them to come in and then to be able to share who they are culturally, spiritually within the academic setting. So, and many of them say it's the first time and only time that they've ever really brought their spiritual self into the academic classroom. And it really has a tremendous impact, I think, on the presenters as well as those in the audience to be able to hear these really poignant and meaningful spiritual artifacts that have been passed down from parents, from grandparents, and the meaning that they have, and then how they will keep these as one of the few things that they have in their dorm rooms, and what strength that they bring from that. And I think it really centers a lot of the students and then reminds them about some of these practices. So I think just inquiring about, have you thought, what are you doing spiritually? Have you thought about drawing from your spiritual connection, spiritual self, to be able to address some of these things? And a lot of them have sort of left that by the wayside in a busy world, a busy schedule. It's hard to sort of maintain some of those reflective practices. And so just being able to bring that up and then explore with them ways that they could do that, is very powerful. We're developing a phone app that allows them to do some 5 minutes, say, each day to some cultural affirmation. And so it could be a spiritual practice that they do. And that it takes 5 minutes, and it's something that they can do each time, and then they report on that. And then it able to prompt them to be able to remember to do that. So it's an integration of sort of new technologies with some traditional ways of being. So we're piloting now and very encouraged by some of the early results of having a structure by which, students of color, Latinx students on predominantly white institution, how that they can become culturally affirmed and have that as an important part of them, and that they can rely on that in terms of overcoming some of the challenges that they feel on campus.
Thank you. Dr. Torres, someone wants to know, does empacho have a correlation with susto?
Empacho is a blockage in the intestines. Curanderos call it sometimes dry empacho or wet empacho. Dry empacho causes diarrhea. Wet empacho causes constipation, and there's a massage on the stomach that is clockwise, and then there's a massage on the back of the body, and the skin is pulled, and whatever is blocking your intestine is dislodged. No, I don't see a correlation to susto. No, I can't see that. No, it's a constipation or diarrhea, and usually it happens to babies who are crawling and they put things in their mouth, and that's when they have their wet empacho. And I have a video on empacho in the classes that are on the resource guide that you've published, and the demonstration is done by one of the best curanderas from Cuernavaca, Tana, and she discusses empacho and how you do your empacho treatment.
Thank you. So there is a question that addresses or generalizes how in Latino culture, someone can be considered spiritually disturbed or crazy if they have dementia or Alzheimer's versus recognizing those as illnesses. Have you heard of this, or do you have an explanation for that?
I haven't heard of that, but we in curanderismo, they do work with the elderly, and they do what they call manteadas, using a shawl or cloth to manipulate the body, because the elderly's bones are brittle, their skin is sensitive, but the elderly are really honored in traditional medicine, and they're the elders, they're the ones with the knowledge. And if they have Alzheimer's, and they're treated with care and with kindness, but not as crazy. That hasn't come up as far as I know. Excellent.
So I have one last question for both of you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. This has been a very wonderful, rich and powerful session. And what I wanted you to kind of close us out with, and if you can each give us your thoughts and statement, how would you reconcile a spirituality as a tool in prevention and healing? How would people be able to differentiate a spirituality from organized religion? How can we make best use of this concept? And let's start with Dr. Torres.
Well, I can tell you how it's helped me, and that is by finding a mentor, a teacher. I have 3 of them. One is Chenchito Crescencio Alvarado, a very kind and very spiritual person. In fact, I'll tell you quickly a story. 2 years ago, he just passed away 2 years ago, but before he passed away, I invited him to my class in the summer, and I have 200 students from all over. And they knew about Chanchito because I write about Chanchito in some of my publications. And during the break, a student came up to him and started crying. And then I started crying, and I asked one of the students, I said, why are you crying? She said, and this lady said, well, I've never met Mother Teresa nor Gandhi, but I'm guessing that Chanchito has the same qualities, that quality of love and kindness and sweet voice. And he was my mentor for 30 years. I mean, think about it. I've learned so much from this wonderful man. The other one is Rita Navarrete from Mexico City. She's another kind, very spiritual person. And then Laurencio Lopez from Oaxaca, another very spiritual person. Find a mentor, find a teacher, and learn from them, and prevent some of the problems by being spiritual and learning from these folks, being generous, being kind, and being loving. All those qualities that sometimes we lose, but a mentor is very important.
Thank you. Dr. Quintana?
Yeah, to this is that when I've been working really intensely with a client, and when I've had what I felt like was a spiritual experience in there, that is, if there wasn't just the two people in the room, but that there was these additional forces of good really at play there. And so I really couldn't, the kind of impact and the connection wasn't just the sum of the two people in the room for that too. So I think as providers can be really open to that experience, and to sort of build yourself up to be a place that you can share that part of yourself in the room. And many times they'll just come up sort of spontaneously through the dedication and commitment that you have.
Thank you so much. You know, I think that the importance of having this kind of conversation, and there's a lot of questions which, you know, leads me to believe that we will continue to explore this issue in this center and in our sister center, and the importance of understanding how, you know, social, structural, psychological, and cultural factors affect our health and, you know, affect our existence, affect our ability to be the best people that we can be, to ourselves and to those around us, is going to continue to give us the opportunity to grow, and for us to continue to explore these items. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your being here. As I mentioned earlier, we will be providing your email addresses in case individuals had some follow-up questions that they can help you with. And hopefully you can join us again in future sessions. To everyone that's listening to us, I really appreciate you spending the time with us. I hope this program has been helpful for you. It's been an honor and a pleasure to moderate this session for you. And Priscilla, I'm going to turn it back over to you for our closing instructions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mancini. We would like to thank our wonderful moderator and our panelists for this fantastic presentation, and for all the amazing work you do for our communities and to preserve our culture. Here is our center's contact information. Please contact us to learn more about our projects and to request free training and technical assistance. If we were not able to answer all your questions during today's session, please reach out to our presenters. You can see their contact information on this slide. Here are some resources we would like to share, including the course Dr. Torres mentioned previously. Please join us for our last session of this VLS series, to be co-presented by the National American Indian and Alaska Native PTTC. The title for this last presentation is How We Can Culturally Navigate Between Both Communities. It is confirmed for August 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, we would like to inform you that the recordings and slides for sessions 1 and 2 are available on our website. You will be directed to a different page to complete our evaluation. Please remember that your opinion is very important to us. Dr. Chow will conclude this session with a closing blessing.
Thank you. This is a traditional closing blessing. If we were outdoors, I would ask you to turn to the direction of the east. And we ask permission of the director of the east to bless us, a direction where the sun rises, a direction that allows us to give thanks for a full day ahead of us. And then we would say Ometeo. Ometeo is a duality in life, man, woman, dark, light. And then we would turn to the direction of the east where the sun sets. And we give thanks to the east for a full day. And we thank for the night. We thank the east for the night and for a restful evening. And then we would say Ometeo, and we would turn to the direction of the north, a direction of our ancestors. And we thank our ancestors for everything they have provided us, for our DNA, and for the coldness, the cold wind of the north. And they would return to the direction of the south, a place of warmth, a place of our childhood, a place of joy, a place of laughter. And then we would look to the heavens and thank Father Sky. Father Sky for the wonderful things that it provides us, for the clouds and the rain that keeps us nourished, for the universe, for the stars, for the moon. And then we would look at the direction and we would kneel and place our hands on Mother Earth. And we would thank Mother Earth for providing the food on our tables. And we ask forgiveness to Mother Earth for destroying some of the environments, for contaminating some of the rivers and some of the oceans. And then we would stand and we would place our hands on our heart and we would thank our heart for pumping blood all over our bodies and for the kindness that our heart provides. And that is the tradition, the traditional blessing for a closing ceremony and a closing for this class. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. This was beautiful. Thank you again for joining our session today. Please enjoy the rest of your day.